Iran is front and center on the world stage today. The Biden administration just announced sanctions against Iran's drone makers and steel industry. U.S. officials said the sanctions are aimed at disrupting Iran's ability to produce the drones used to attack Israel last weekend. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden is apparently doing what he can to tamp down the odds of Israel attacking Iran in retaliation for the missile barrage lobbed last weekend. Now, a new report by Axios says that Israel was considering a retaliatory strike against Iran on Monday, but decided to postpone it. The U.S. is deeply concerned about a wider regional war. The war in Gaza is still simmering, as are exchanges with Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed terror group, on the northern border with Lebanon.
Yeah, I think the first thing that's really important to point out is that this is not a retaliatory strike that Israel is considering. Iran's strike was retaliatory to Israel's strike on its consulate in Damascus. And the mainstream media is really attempting to frame this differently, and we should really try not to fall into that trap. There has been a tit for tat. Israel was the first strike. Iran was the second strike. And now we're in a place where Israel, Netanyahu in particular, has an appetite for escalation because of his own political dramas happening at home. And he's acting out of step with the explicit interest of the United States right now. In fact, there was a really fascinating clip, an exchange from one of these State Department spokespeople and a journalist asking questions about the underlying attack, right? Israel's strike on the consulate in Damascus, Iranian consulate in Damascus, asking if it's made a determination yet as to whether or not it was, of course, a consulate and therefore a contravention of the rules-based order, as it were. Let's take a look at that clip.
We need to gather enough information that will allow us to make an actual determination.
You have no one on the ground in Syria.
We have arranged,
overtly,
as I said to you when the last time you engaged with me on this question, we have a range of abilities, a range of ways to gather information. They're partner countries of ours who are on the ground. We have intelligence capabilities, obviously, and we're continuing to gather information, but we've not yet been able to make a determination.
I get it, but you were pretty quick into condemning the the invasion of the Mexican embassy in Ecuador.
That was a very clear, well-established embassy.
And this is not very clear where they blew up.
This is something that is taking a little bit more time.
No one died in that incident.
That's not the question. The question was, what is it? Was it an embassy or a consulate or not? And it was very clear.
How hard is it to figure that out?
In the case of the Mexican, it's something that we're gathering information on.
It's been like 2 weeks.
And we continue to gather information. We don't have a determination yet.
All right, so you see some reluctance there to simply make a determination. There's not really fulsome explanation as to why this would be taking weeks to determine. It seems obvious on its face. The United States made a very quick determination about who was in the wrong in the situation in Ecuador, issuing strict condemnations. And frankly, immediately after the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate, folks with expertise on these issues said this is going to undermine the rules-based order. We're going to see a failure of the West to have any integrity in telling people not to violate the norm of not breaching other people's embassies and frankly killing people. And you heard in that exchange that there seems to be a complete and total unwillingness to view Israel in the same light as the situation with the Ecuadorian embassy is being viewed in.
Yeah, I think that was just obviously an example of stonewalling. It seems clear they know what the composition of the building was. They know that was not an acceptable thing to do, and they know that admitting that they don't want to admit that. So it's transparent what was going on there. That was a quintessential example of a government official just not wanting to admit an inconvenient reality. They don't care, and they don't want to admit they don't care. So that's clearly what was going on there.
It's really incredible stuff, especially when you remember that the threat, the risk here is broader regional war that directly implicates the United States
Biden doesn't want.
Not a proxy battle, but a full-on war that we are involved in.
The U.S. doesn't want, and interestingly enough, has been able to pull Israel back from the brink of, at least for now, which I think shows you several things, that Netanyahu still takes Biden's phone calls, and when we don't know exactly what was said to him, but if some maybe clearer, more stark portrait was painted, like, you cannot do this, they fell in line, at least for the time being, which is, again, a good thing. I'm glad that Biden did that. It seemed very obvious that there was no need for an assault from Israel onto Iran, given that what Iran had done to Israel amounted to practically and almost nothing. Obviously, we spent money to fend it off, but had one injury and no buildings even hit or destroyed. So why we would go to World War III for that makes no sense. So I'm glad, frankly, Biden was able to accomplish that.
Now, we should note that there is some reporting, I think it's coming out of the Times of Israel, that a deal might have been struck here where, remember, before Biden was saying Rafah is his red line. Sometimes he called it Haifa, but he's been saying that Rafah is his red line, saying that absolutely this city where 1 million refugees have been told to shelter over the course of the 6-month onslaught in Gaza should not be invaded with a ground invasion by Israel because of the humanitarian catastrophe that would follow. Netanyahu said, I don't care, I'm going to ground invade Rafah. Now, apparently there's some unconfirmed reports that there's a negotiation here where maybe Biden says, fine, you can invade Rafah, just don't strike back at Iran. Now, how weak does that make the United States of America look and then Biden look, where you're willing to trade one red line for another? What incentive is there for Israel to stop escalating? Can it risk a broader war, a broader conflict with another adversary in the region if it means, okay, now I'm allowed to do Rafah and to bomb Iran as long as I don't do the third thing that I might be escalating to? It's really outrageous if this turns out to be confirmed as true. But to your other point about the administration being simply unwilling to admit what it knows in the context of the Damascus bombing, admit what it knows about Israeli wrongdoing as it's been reported, ProPublica put out a really important report on yesterday titled "Blinken is sitting on staff recommendations to sanction Israeli military units linked to killings or rapes." And the reporting basically lays out that there has been an investigation and some substantiated evidence about the Israeli military violating international law in a way that it would require the United States of America to withhold its funding through the Leahy Act, if true. So the fact is, the reporting is that these allegations have been substantiated within the State Department. Anthony Blinken is sitting on that knowledge, but is refusing to make it public or be expressed about it because he knows that the implications are that his hands will be tied. Biden will have to then either break American law or withhold funding from Israel, which is something that up until this point he's been completely unwilling to do. That is the only red line that he's articulated, which he's remained firm to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it seems like we have the U.S. government has multiple levers by which it could influence Israeli policy at this point, including by being in a position where the administration would have to withhold funds even though it wants to continue to fund Israel. So I don't know. We'll have to see.
Specifically, so the incidents under review that might prompt the State Department to have to withhold aid to Israel are as follows. This is from the article. They took place in the West Bank, again, not a Hamas-controlled area, and occurred before the Hamas October 7th attack on Israel. They include reports of extrajudicial killings by the Israeli border police, an incident in which a battalion gagged, handcuffed, and left an elderly Palestinian American man for dead, and an allegation that interrogators tortured and raped a teenager who had been accused of throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails. A State Department spokesperson responded to ProPublica.
And the reporting is that the State Department has confirmed that those things took place?
Yeah. So the State Department spokesperson told ProPublica the agency takes its commitment to uphold U.S. human rights laws seriously. Quote, "This process is one that demands a careful and full review, and the department undergoes a fact-specific investigation, applying the same standards and procedures regardless of the country in question." So again, it seems like there's this defaulting to it's under review, it's under review. Weeks go by, months go by. These are incidents that happened prior to October 7th. And if the Shireen Abu Akleh example is any indication, eventually enough time passes that when there is an admission of guilt, the crisis has elapsed and there is no accountability for anybody who's actually involved. And in this instance, when we're observing the kind of escalation into a regional conflict, potentially global conflict that Israel is engaging in, I think a lot of folks are going to start asking, can we afford waiting for the State Department to keep dragging its feet and constructively giving cover to Israel to do what it wants to do in the region?
More Rising right after this.